In the vast expanse of the Zarin Empire, where starships soared through interstellar voids and diplomatic missions were routine affairs, Princess Viera stood out as an enigma. The announcement of her upcoming diplomatic mission to the neighboring Andros system was nothing unusual. What caught everyone off guard, however, was her demand to be escorted by a human crew aboard a human ship. The Galactic Empire's fleets boasted the most advanced vessels in the known universe, far superior to anything humanity had ever built. Yet here she was, turning her back on her empire's elite in favor of a species often considered inferior. Her closest advisors were baffled, their faces twisted with confusion as they tried to make sense of her choice. Humanity had proven itself resourceful and resilient, but their ships, they were clunky, outdated compared to the Empire's state-of-the-art vessels. It was political suicide, they warned her, to rely on such a crew. The political implications of rejecting the Empire's own fleet in favor of human technology could be disastrous. But Princess Viera was resolute. She had her reasons, ones she kept tightly guarded. For weeks, the halls of the royal court buzzed with rumors and speculation. Some whispered that the princess had ulterior motives, perhaps seeking to strengthen ties with humanity in a way that only she could. Others believed she was making a symbolic statement, an unspoken challenge to the rigidity of the Zarin Empire's traditions. Yet, few knew the truth. The princess wasn't just going on a diplomatic mission. She was walking into a trap. A deadly power struggle was brewing within the empire. Factions vying for control saw her as an obstacle, and her departure from the empire's core worlds presented the perfect opportunity for her enemies to strike. Unbeknownst to the public, several assassination attempts had already been thwarted, but the princess knew the danger was far from over. Her own people could no longer be trusted to protect her. What she needed wasn't a force bound by protocol and tradition. She needed adaptability, quick thinking, and above all, unpredictability. Qualities that humans excelled at. Humanity, with their often underestimated technology and resilience, had survived countless struggles in the galaxy, not because of superior ships, but because of their ability to adapt. And that was precisely what she needed on this dangerous mission. Captain Mark Steele was no stranger to unusual missions. A veteran of countless conflicts, he had led his crew through diplomatic tensions, interstellar skirmishes, and rescue operations across the galaxy. But nothing had prepared him for this. A direct request from the princess of the mighty Zarin Empire herself. Sitting in the briefing room, his crew exchanged glances as they read through the mission dossier. It was simple enough. Escort the princess through uncharted space to the Andros system, ensuring her safe arrival for a diplomatic summit. But something felt off. Why them? Why now? The Empire's ships are far superior to ours. Lieutenant Ayla muttered under her breath. Why would she choose us? Mark had the same question. The Zarin Empire's vessels were faster, stronger, and better equipped in every conceivable way. But if there was one thing he'd learned over the years, it was that things were never as they seemed when it came to interstellar politics. She must have her reasons, Mark replied, his voice steady. And our job is to see this through, no questions asked. The crew was a diverse bunch, each handpicked for their unique talents. Ayla was their expert navigator, known for her ability to guide them through the most treacherous space regions. Then there was Rex, the ship's chief engineer, who could fix almost anything with nothing more than a wrench and some wire. Together, they had faced dangers that would send most crews running. But this mission, with its layers of mystery, felt different. Their first meeting with the princess took place aboard the human ship, Vanguard. When Princess Viera boarded, Mark was struck by how calm and composed she appeared. She carried none of the arrogance he'd expected from someone of her status. In fact, there was an air of quiet determination about her, as though she was bracing herself for something far worse than a diplomatic mission. "Captain Steele," she said, her voice steady but soft. Trust your crew will ensure my safety. Mark nodded, his expression neutral. That's what we're here for, Princess. Whatever lies ahead, we'll face it together. Yet, even as they exchanged formalities, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't being told everything. Something more dangerous than diplomacy was at play. As the Vanguard departed from Zarin territory, the tension on board grew. Mark could sense it in the way his crew moved about the ship, their usual camaraderie tinged with uncertainty. The princess remained a mystery, keeping mostly to herself in her private quarters. But it was clear that she wasn't just another dignitary. There was a gravity to her presence, an unspoken weight of responsibility that seemed to hang over her every move. For Mark, it was a reminder that this mission was far more complicated than it appeared. Captain, Isla's voice crackled over the comms. We're approaching the uncharted zone. No known maps or data beyond this point. Understood. Mark replied, staring out at the vast unknown through the viewport. Keep us on course. Everyone, be alert. The crew worked in silence as they crossed into the uncharted region of space. It was the perfect place for an ambush. No galactic authorities, no witnesses. Mark tightened his grip on the console, his instincts telling him that danger was lurking just beyond their sensors. As the hours passed, Rex called from the engine room. Captain, you might want to take a look at this. Mark hurried down to the engine room, where Rex was standing by a diagnostic screen. What's the problem? Nothing yet, Rex said, frowning. But I've picked up some strange readings. I can't tell if it's interference from the uncharted region or something more deliberate. It's subtle, but enough to make me uneasy. Mark's gut churned. Keep monitoring it. If anything feels off, let me know immediately. Rex nodded, but the unease lingered. Something was coming. Mark could feel it, and he had a sinking suspicion that it wasn't just a random malfunction. With the Vanguard venturing deeper into uncharted space, both the crew and the princess braced themselves for the unknown dangers that lie ahead. Hidden plots, shifting alliances, and looming threats from within and beyond the Empire will test their resolve as the mission takes an unexpected turn. The Vanguard moved deeper into the uncharted zone, and the silence on the ship became unnerving. Every creak, every flicker of the lights, seemed amplified in the stillness. Captain Mark Steele remained on high alert, trusting his instincts more than the sensors at this point. The uncharted regions of space were notorious for masking strange phenomena, but something about this journey felt more deliberate. Anything new, Rex? Mark's voice came over the comms. Rex was bent over his console, eyes flicking between readings. Still nothing concrete, Captain. But those strange signals haven't gone away. It's like they're trying to hide, but not doing a very good job of it. Could be a cloaked ship or some kind of spatial anomaly. Mark's brow furrowed. Cloaked ships weren't unheard of, but for them to be followed into this unmonitored region, it was too much of a coincidence. The princess had warned them that this mission wasn't what it seemed, and Mark was beginning to think she knew far more than she had let on. He tapped a command on his console. Ayla, I want a full scan of our surroundings. Don't rely on the usual filters. See if there's anything off the charts. Yes, Captain. Ayla responded, her voice tense with focus. As the crew scrambled to adjust their equipment, the princess emerged from her quarters. She moved with a quiet grace, her expression calm, but her eyes betraying an underlying tension. She approached Mark, her gaze sharp as it swept across the bridge. We're being watched, she said softly, as though stating a fact. Mark didn't flinch. He had suspected as much. Do you know who it is? The princess hesitated for a moment, her gaze shifting to the star-streaked void outside the viewport. Not exactly, but I have my suspicions. There are factions within the Empire that would prefer I don't make it to the Andros system alive. Mark didn't need more explanation. He had dealt with enough interstellar politics to know that royal intrigue was a dangerous game. But this wasn't just a matter of survival for her. It was a challenge to the power structures that governed the galaxy. Are they Empire ships? Mark asked, his voice low. Vieira shook her head. No, if they were, you wouldn't have detected even the slightest hint of them. These are likely mercenaries. Hired guns. They'll be unpredictable, but we might have the advantage in that they don't know who they're dealing with yet. Mark's mouth formed a grim line. Mercenaries or not, if they engage, we'll make them regret it. Before either of them could say more, Isla's voice came through the intercom. Captain, I've got something. Several ships, just outside of sensor range, holding position. They're not Empire vessels, but they're waiting. Mark's eyes narrowed. Ready for an ambush. Perfect. The princess straightened, her expression serious. This is what I feared. They're here for me. Mark stood from his seat, his voice firm as he issued orders. Rex, I need full power to the shields. Ayla, plot an evasive course. We don't engage unless absolutely necessary. Let's see if we can shake them. The crew sprang into action. The Vanguard was not the most advanced ship in the galaxy, but it had something most of the elite Empire ships lacked: unpredictability. Humans had a knack for improvisation, for thinking outside the box when all seemed lost. As the ship veered sharply, its engines roaring to life, the princess took a seat near the captain. Mark stole a glance at her, noting the calm determination in her eyes. She was far from helpless, and that made him respect her even more. They're closing in, Isla warned, her fingers dancing over the controls. If we don't act soon, they'll cut us off. Mark clenched his jaw, weighing his options. Take us into the nebula field up ahead. Ayla looked startled. The nebula's density will mess with our systems. We could lose navigation entirely. That's what I'm counting on. Mark replied, his eyes locked on the swirling mass of gas and dust ahead. They won't follow us in there. They'll lose their advantage. With a swift motion, Ayla adjusted the ship's trajectory, sending the Vanguard plunging into the nebula. As they entered the dense cloud, the view outside the ship became obscured by swirling shades of purple and blue, with flashes of light from the nebula's electrical storms illuminating the void. The ship shook violently as the systems struggled to cope with the interference. Alarms blared, and Rex's voice came over the comms. Captain, we're taking a beating down here. Can keep the engines running, but I can't promise it'll be smooth. Just keep us moving, Mark replied, his grip on the console tightening. He glanced at the princess. Any second thoughts? Princess Vieira gave him a small, knowing smile. None. This is exactly what I expected from humans. The ship lurched again, but they pressed on. The mercenary ships had hesitated at the nebula's edge, unsure whether to follow. It gave them a few precious minutes of breathing room. They're holding back, Ayla said, a hint of relief in her voice. But they won't wait forever. Mark nodded, his mind racing through their next steps. We use this time to regroup. Rex, how are the engines holding up? Barely, came the gruff reply. I can give you a bit more speed, but not much. We won't last long in here. We won't need to, Mark said, his eyes narrowing. We just need to make it through. As the Vanguard pushed deeper into the nebula, Mark knew they had bought themselves some time. But this was only the beginning. The mercenaries weren't the only threat lurking in the shadows, and the farther they ventured into uncharted space, the more dangerous the mission would become. With each passing moment, the stakes grew higher, and Mark could feel the weight of it bearing down on him. But he wasn't one to back down from a challenge, and neither was his crew. Together, they would face whatever lay ahead, even if it meant defying the odds at every turn. The princess, watching the swirling nebula outside, seemed to sense the same thing. Captain Steele, she said quietly. I believe this is only the beginning of our troubles. Mark gave a slight nod. Then we better be ready for whatever comes next. As the Vanguard continued its perilous journey through the nebula, the swirling gases outside made navigation a nightmare. Visibility was near zero, and the ship's systems were struggling to compensate for the interference. Inside, The crew worked tirelessly to maintain control, but a sense of unease lingered in the air. Mark Steele stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the viewport, though all he could see were shifting clouds of purple and blue. The nebula had given them a temporary reprieve, but he knew it wouldn't last. The mercenaries hunting them wouldn't wait forever, and the longer they stayed hidden in the nebula, the greater the risk of being stranded. Ayla, seated at the navigation console, was furiously typing commands into the ship's computer. "Captain, the nebula's interference is getting worse. I can barely keep us on course, and the storm ahead." "We don't have a choice," Mark interrupted. "We either push through or we sit here and wait to be picked off." Rex's voice crackled over the intercom from the engine room. "Captain, I've rerouted power to the shields and thrusters, but we're running hot. I don't know how long the engines can take this. If we keep pushing like this, we could lose them altogether." Mark rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They were running out of time and options. The nebula, while it offered temporary cover, was a dangerous place to linger. Electrical storms could rip the ship apart, and their systems were already buckling under the strain. He glanced at Princess Viera, who stood quietly nearby, observing the situation with an unreadable expression. Her calmness in the face of danger was admirable, but it also made him wonder, what was she really thinking? "This isn't just about escaping the mercenaries, is it?" Mark asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. The princess turned to him, her violet eyes betraying a hint of sadness. "No, Captain, it's not. There's more at stake than you realize. The factions within my empire, they're not just trying to stop me. They're trying to destroy everything I represent." Mark narrowed his eyes. "And what exactly do you represent?" Princess Viera hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I am not merely a figurehead for diplomatic missions. My position within the royal family has made me a target for those who wish to seize control of the empire. There are those who see my vision for the future as a threat to their power." "What vision?" Mark pressed, his curiosity piqued. Viera's voice was barely above a whisper. "Unity. I believe that the survival of the galaxy depends on cooperation between species, humans, Zurans, and others alike. I've spent years building relationships with key figures across the galaxy, but my efforts have injured those who prefer to keep our empire isolated, to rule with an iron fist." Mark leaned back, taking in her words. It made sense now, why she had chosen a human ship, why she had trusted them with her life. Her mission wasn't just about politics. It was about survival, not only her own but the survival of her ideals. And there were those who would do anything to see her fail. "Captain," Ayla called out, interrupting the conversation. "We're approaching the storm. It's massive, bigger than we anticipated." Mark's eyes flicked back to the viewport. The nebula's colorful gases had begun to darken, and flashes of bright light illuminated the clouds ahead. An electrical storm. If they entered it, the ship's systems could be fried in seconds. But if they turned back, they'd be walking right into the mercenaries' trap. "Brace yourselves," Mark ordered. "We're going in." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but followed his command without hesitation. They had been through worse, just not recently. The Vanguard plunged into the heart of the storm. Immediately, the ship was buffeted by violent bursts of energy, shaking it to its core. Sparks flew from several consoles, and alarms blared throughout the ship. Mark gripped the edge of his seat as the lights flickered. "Rex, how are we holding up?" he shouted over the chaos. "Barely," Rex's strained voice came through the intercom. "The engines are overheating, and we've got multiple systems at critical levels. I don't know how long we can keep this up." "Do whatever it takes to keep us moving," Mark responded, his voice grim. The ship shuddered as another wave of energy slammed into it. Panels on the walls sparked and smoked, and several consoles short-circuited with a loud pop. Ayla frantically worked to stabilize their course, but the interference from the storm was wreaking havoc on their systems. Princess Viera held onto the railing, her expression still remarkably calm despite the chaos around her. "We need to get through this, Captain. The storm won't last forever." Mark nodded, though he wasn't sure how much longer they could last. Every second in the storm felt like an eternity, and he knew they were running out of time. If the ship's systems failed completely, they would be sitting ducks. Suddenly, the storm seemed to intensify, as if it was reacting to their presence. The ship was violently rocked by another surge of energy, and the power flickered again, this time longer than before. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the storm's intensity lessened. The flashes of light outside began to fade, and the ship's systems slowly stabilized. Mark exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "We made it," Ayla whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. But before anyone could celebrate, the comms crackled to life with a signal they had hoped wouldn't come. "Captain Steele." A cold, unfamiliar voice filled the bridge. "We've been watching you. Your little detour through the nebula was clever, but it's over now. Surrender the princess, or your ship will be destroyed." Mark's heart sank. The mercenaries had followed them after all. He glanced at the princess, who met his gaze with steely resolve. "We can't let them take me, Captain. If they do, it won't just be the end of this mission. It will be the end of everything." Mark clenched his jaw, his mind racing. They had escaped the storm, but now they were caught in the jaws of an enemy far more dangerous than the storm could ever be. And surrender wasn't an option. As the mercenary ships closed in, Mark knew they were about to face their greatest challenge yet. "Prepare for battle," he ordered, his voice steady. "We're not going down without a fight." The moment Captain Mark Steele gave the order, the bridge of the Vanguard buzzed with tension. The threat from the mercenaries loomed large, their ships closing in fast, ready to strike. The Vanguard wasn't the most advanced ship, but Mark trusted in his crew's ability to fight smart, if not with superior firepower, then with strategy. "Shields at maximum," Rex called from the engine room. "I've rerouted power from the auxiliary systems, but it's not going to hold forever. We need to make this quick." Mark nodded, his eyes never leaving the view screen, where three sleek black ships were now visible, their shapes dark and predatory against the glowing nebula. These weren't just any mercenaries. Their ships were heavily modified for combat, outfitted with weapons far more advanced than anything humanity typically dealt with. "Keep us steady," Mark ordered Ayla. "Prepare evasive maneuvers on my mark." Ayla's hands hovered over the controls, her heart racing, but her focus unshakable. She had been in tight spots before, but this felt different. The weight of their mission, the responsibility of protecting the princess, and the looming battle ahead. It was enough to break most crews, but not this one, not today. The cold voice of the mercenary leader crackled over the comms again. "Last chance, Captain. Hand over the princess, and we'll let your crew live. Resist, and you'll all die." Mark's jaw clenched. "Tell them we're not interested in negotiating." The princess, standing just behind him, gave a nod of approval. She knew what was at stake. There was no surrendering now, not with the knowledge she carried and the factions that wanted her dead. If these mercenaries succeeded, it would plunge the galaxy into chaos. Without hesitation, Mark signaled Ayla, "Now." The Vanguard spun into action, dodging the first volley of laser fire that lit up the space between them. The ship banked hard to the right, narrowly avoiding a direct hit from the lead mercenary ship. The crew braced themselves as the ship rattled under the strain, but their training kept them focused. "Return fire," Mark barked. Gunner stations lit up as the Vanguard fired its pulse cannons in quick bursts, aiming for the lead mercenary ship. The shots connected, but their shields absorbed most of the damage. The Vanguard's weapons were no match for the heavily armored mercenaries. "We're not doing enough damage," Rex shouted over the comms. "Their shields are too strong." Mark gritted his teeth. He needed to think, and fast. They couldn't outgun the mercenaries, and their shields wouldn't hold forever, but they could still outmaneuver them. The nebula's chaotic environment was their only advantage. "Ayla, take us back into the nebula," Mark ordered, surprising the crew. "Captain, the storm." Ayla began, but Mark cut her off. "I know, but it's the only way we're going to survive this. Get us deep into that storm." Without further hesitation, Ayla veered the Vanguard back toward the dense cloud of energy. The mercenaries, realizing what was happening, immediately gave chase, their ships firing relentlessly as they closed in. The Vanguard buckled under the barrage of fire, alarms blaring as sections of the hull took damage. Sparks flew from the control panels, but the crew kept their focus. "Shields are failing," Rex shouted. "We can't take much more of this." Mark's mind raced. They needed a plan, something that would turn the tables in their favor. Then it hit him. The nebula, the electrical storms within it could damage their systems, but it could also disrupt the mercenaries' more advanced technology. It was a risk, but it was their best shot. "We're going to use the storm," Mark said, turning to the princess. "If we can lure them deep enough, their systems will fry just like ours, but we'll have the advantage of knowing when to pull out." The princess nodded, understanding his plan immediately. "It's dangerous, but it's the only way." Mark turned back to Ayla. "Take us straight into the heart of the storm, then cut all power to the external systems. We're going to make ourselves a ghost." Ayla's eyes widened. "Captain, if we lose power completely, we won't have shields. We'll be sitting ducks." "We're already sitting ducks, Ayla," Mark replied grimly. "Trust me." With a deep breath, Ayla guided the Vanguard deeper into the nebula's core, where electrical discharges danced across the screen like lightning. The mercenary ships followed, relentless in their pursuit. Mark watched as they closed in, waiting for the right moment. The ship shuddered violently as the storm's energy interfered with their systems, and the lights flickered again. "Now," Mark shouted. Ayla hit the command, cutting all power to the external systems. The ship went dark, its engines silent as it drifted through the storm like a phantom. The mercenary ships, not expecting the maneuver, hesitated for just a moment, but it was enough. The storm erupted around them, tendrils of energy lashing out at the mercenary ships. Their shields flickered, struggling to maintain power as the electrical discharges overloaded their systems. "We've got them," Rex yelled over the comms. "Their systems are shorting out." Mark allowed himself a small smile. "Fire at will. Target their engines." The Vanguard roared back to life, its pulse cannons lighting up the nebula. The first mercenary ship took a direct hit to its engine core, causing it to spin out of control before exploding in a brilliant flash of light. The second ship, its shields already compromised by the storm, was soon disabled as well. The third mercenary ship, realizing the tide had turned, attempted to retreat, but Ayla was already ahead of them. With a calculated burst of fire, the Vanguard struck the fleeing ship's propulsion systems, leaving it dead in the water. The battle was over. The crew erupted in cheers, the tension finally breaking as they realized they had won. Mark exhaled a long breath, the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. "We did it," Ayla said, a grin spreading across her face. Mark nodded, but he knew this was just a small victory. The real danger was still out there, lurking in the shadows of the Empire. The factions that sought to destroy Princess Viera's vision wouldn't stop with a few mercenaries. Princess Viera stepped forward, her voice soft but resolute. "This is only the beginning, Captain Steele. There will be others." Mark met her gaze, his expression grim. "Then we'll be ready for them." As the crew began repairing the damage to the Vanguard, Mark knew that their journey was far from over. The battle they had just won was a glimpse of the larger war they were about to face, a war that would determine the future of the galaxy itself. But for now, they had survived, and that was enough. For today. The atmosphere on the Vanguard was tense but focused. Despite their victory over the mercenaries, the damage to the ship was severe, and the crew worked around the clock to restore vital systems. The crew's exhaustion was visible, but so was their determination. They knew this mission was far from over. Captain Mark Steele watched as his team patched up the worst of the damage. In the back of his mind, he was already thinking about their next move. The enemy wasn't just mercenaries. They were pawns in a much larger game, and Princess Vieira was the key. Mark found the princess in the ship's observation deck, staring out at the stormy nebula. She hadn't spoken much since the battle, but the weight on her shoulders was evident. "Captain," she said softly without turning around, sensing his presence. "I never expected them to be so ruthless. I underestimated just how far my enemies would go." Mark joined her by the viewport, his arms crossed. "We'll get you to the Andros system safely. Your enemies don't scare us." Princess Vieira smiled, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "It's not just about me, Captain. If I fail, the entire galaxy could fall into chaos. Those who seek to control the Empire have no interest in peace. They want war, and they're willing to tear everything apart to get it." Mark considered her words. He had suspected the political stakes were high, but now it was clear. This wasn't just about a royal squabble. The survival of millions, perhaps billions, hung in the balance. "We've come too far to turn back now," Mark said. "What's the plan?" Princess Vieira turned to him, her expression resolute. "The Andros system is still our destination, but we won't be going straight there. I have a contact, someone who can help. He's an old friend, someone with the resources to challenge the factions working against me. We need to make one more stop before we reach Andros." Mark raised an eyebrow. "And this contact, can we trust him?" "We don't have a choice," Vieira replied. "He's the only one who knows the full extent of the conspiracy within the Empire. If we can reach him, we might stand a chance." Mark nodded. "All right. Give me the coordinates, and we'll make the jump as soon as we're ready." As Vieira handed him the data, Mark felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had fought too hard to give up now. If this contact could help them uncover the full scope of the conspiracy, then they might have a fighting chance to stop the coming war. 2 days later, the Vanguard arrived at a remote space station hidden deep within the fringes of neutral territory. The station was a small, unassuming outpost, far from any major trade routes, and it was the perfect place to meet without drawing unwanted attention. The crew was on edge as they prepared for the rendezvous. This was the moment everything had been leading up to. The storm, the mercenaries, it had all been building to this. As the Vanguard docked, Mark and Princess Vieira disembarked and were greeted by a tall figure in a hooded cloak. His face was obscured, but his voice was calm and familiar to Vieira. "Princess," the figure said, bowing slightly. "It's been too long." "Rethis," Vieira said, stepping forward. "I'm glad to see you're still alive." The man pulled back his hood, revealing sharp features and a grim expression. "Barely. Your enemies have been very active. They nearly found me last week." Mark watched the exchange silently, assessing the man. Rethis seemed trustworthy, but in this galaxy, appearances could be deceiving. Still, Vieira's relief was genuine, and that gave Mark some comfort. "We need your help," Vieira said. "The factions in the Empire have become more dangerous than ever. They've sent mercenaries after me, and I'm certain they're planning something far worse. If we don't stop them, the galaxy will be plunged into war." Rethis nodded gravely. "I know. I've been tracking their movements for months. They've been amassing ships and weapons on the far side of the galaxy, preparing for a coup. Once they seize control of the Empire, they'll launch a full-scale invasion of the neighboring systems." Mark's stomach sank. This was worse than he had imagined. A galactic war on that scale would destroy everything in its path. "We have to stop them," Mark said, his voice firm. "But we can't do it alone." Rethis smiled slightly. "That's why I'm here. I've been organizing a resistance, a coalition of forces from across the galaxy who believe in Princess Viera's vision of peace. We're small, but we're growing. With the right push, we can turn the tide. Viera's eyes lit up with hope. Then we still have a chance. Rethus handed her a datapad. Here. These are the locations of the faction leaders' strongholds. If we can take them out before they mobilize, we can cripple their forces and prevent the coup. Mark looked over the data. It was a bold plan, but it could work. We'll need to move fast. Once they realize we're onto them, they'll strike. Agreed, Viera said, determination hardening in her voice. We'll split up. Rethus, you lead the resistance and hit their main fleet. Captain Steele and I will go after the leader of the faction, the one orchestrating all of this. Rethus gave a solemn nod. It's a dangerous mission, but if anyone can pull it off, it's you. Mark knew there was no turning back now. They had one shot to stop the coup before it plunged the galaxy into chaos. And it all depended on them. The final mission took them to the heart of a heavily fortified asteroid base, where the leader of the faction had holed up with his most loyal followers. The base was a fortress, bristling with defenses, and getting inside would be nearly impossible. But Mark had never been one to shy away from impossible odds. We'll have to go in quietly, Mark whispered to Viera as they approached the base in a small, unmarked shuttle. If we alert them to our presence, we won't stand a chance. Viera nodded, her eyes focused on the task ahead. Once we're inside, I'll confront him. He knows me. He won't expect a direct confrontation. Mark frowned. Are you sure that's a good idea? He's dangerous. I don't have a choice, Viera said quietly. This ends with him. They slipped through the base's outer defenses, relying on stealth and careful planning. Inside, the halls were eerily quiet, the tension thick in the air. They moved quickly, avoiding patrols and security checkpoints until they reached the central command chamber. There, sitting on a throne-like chair, was the faction leader, the cold, calculating figure with a cruel smile. Viera, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. I knew you'd come. Viera stepped forward, her chin held high. It's over. Your plan has failed. The leader laughed, rising to his feet. Failed? Hardly. Even if you kill me, the coup is already in motion. My followers will finish what I started. Mark stepped forward, his blaster ready. We'll see about that. The leader's eyes flicked to Mark, but he didn't seem concerned. Humans, always so eager to fight. But this isn't your war. It never was. It is now, Mark said coldly. Before the leader could react, Viera moved. In one swift motion, she disarmed him, her blade pressed to his throat. It ends here, she said, her voice steady. The leader's eyes widened in fear. You think killing me will change anything? Viera leaned closer, her voice a whisper. No, but it will buy us time. With that, she struck, ending his life in one clean motion. The base erupted into chaos as alarms blared, but it was too late for the faction. Viera and Mark fought their way out, leaving the crumbling remains of the coup behind them. As the vanguard sailed away from the smoldering asteroid base, the tension finally lifted. The coup had been thwarted, and the galaxy was safe, for now. Princess Viera stood beside Mark on the bridge, her expression one of quiet victory. We've done it, she said softly. The galaxy is safe. Mark nodded. For now. But the fight isn't over. There will always be those who seek to disrupt peace. Viera smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. That's why we have people like you, Captain Steele, to remind us what's worth fighting for. Mark smiled back. You're not so bad yourself, Princess. And with that, the vanguard sailed into the stars, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.